Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Punter Podcast, and I've got a big show for you today. The student loan pause is ending, and we have a date that you can prepare to resume repayments for. So we know this because the House of Representatives passed the debt ceiling bill, which had a very key provision in it that said specifically that President Biden is no longer, for any reason, allowed to extend the student loan pause past the end of August. So that's a firm date now. You're going to start seeing a ton of news about the Department of Education sending work orders to student loan servicers to get them in the process of resuming repayment after, more than 3 years of people not having to make payments. So this is pretty shocking, and there's a whole bunch of stuff I want to talk about in relation to this bill because it is very dense in terms of why everything happened the way it did. So first I want to talk about just why would Biden give up this ending the student loan pause in the debt ceiling bill? Like, why would he choose to just give that up and surrender on that issue? It was widely expected, and I certainly expected that if he lost the Supreme Court, then his natural plan would be to extend the student loan pause and try to cancel debt by the Higher Education Act, because he needs to make sure that young voters turn out. That's the demographic group in the Democratic Party that he tends to be weakest with. And that's one of the reasons he's leaned into student loan debt relief so hard, is because he and his team view this as a way to energize young voters. And there's some evidence at the Georgia Senate race and some other things, and the better than expected midterm performance that that was a big motivating factor, was the fact that Biden went out of his way to try to get a lot of student loan debt relief for younger Americans. So why did Biden give this up? So a couple thoughts. It did show up as a big cost in the budget. So it's $5 billion a month, according to CBOs. It's about $60 billion a year, and that's what the cost of the student loan pause is. So if you think about all the different things they could have given and what did they get, we'll get into that in a second. But Biden, did decide, I'll give up letting the student loan pause end. Now, in terms of just why he did that, I have a couple theories. So one theory is that the student loan pause was going to be forced to end anyway, probably by a conservative majority in the Supreme Court. So as we know, SoFi sued to end the pause, and that lawsuit was probably going to end up in the Supreme Court sometime in the late fall. If it proceeded through the courts, they probably would have done an emergency injunction if Biden had issued an extension of the student loan pause after the cancellation decision from the Supreme Court went against him. And if that had happened, that emergency injunction would have worked its way through the courts a little faster. And so I don't think that the SoFi case would have made it to the Supreme Court for this term, but it probably would have made it for the next term. And that probably would have resulted in striking down the student loan pause. Now, certainly Biden could have run against the Supreme Court again, but with doing the deal the way he did with the debt ceiling deal, in this way, I think that he gets to run against House Republicans instead of running against SoFi, which is politically probably better to run against House Republicans. Now, you could say, well, he could have run against the Supreme Court. Well, he's already doing that, right? So I think that he can certainly try to blame House Republicans for ending the student loan pause, and I'm certainly certain that he'll probably try to do that as well. You can also see what Speaker McCarthy, the way he's trying to spin the debt ceiling deal too. So I think that Biden was willing to give up this end of the student loan pause for just really, again, a variety of reasons. But one of the key reasons is this kind of rescues him politically a little bit. So there was certainly a very powerful, very, very vocal group of activists within the Democratic Party that were demanding action on this issue, and were not really satisfied at all until you saw some sort of cancellation occur. They would not be okay with the student loan pause ending. So I think one thing to think about is President Biden needs to win the upper Midwest and working class whites again if he's going to be president in 2024 and beyond. So if you think about what are the key states, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, you've got to win white working class voters in those states, and then you've got to win enough people in the suburbs in Arizona and Georgia, right? That was kind of the key to his victory in 2020. And if he wants to have that same repeat, the sort of activist group on student loan debt within the Democratic Party would not be satisfied with restarting student loan payments, if Biden chose to do that on his own, right? That would not be a positive at all. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, I could see those key voters in those key states possibly being turned off if Biden were to extend the student loan pause from, due to pressure from that activist part of the Democratic Party or in the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Say he did respond by extending the student loan pause if the Supreme Court strikes down cancellation, and he extends it into 2024, right? So SoFi probably strikes it down, but then he perhaps doesn't look as moderate to those key swing voters. That's just throwing out guesses, right? I mean, ultimately, maybe I'm overthinking that, but that's just a guess. Is this way he gets to run against Republicans in the House instead of running against, the Supreme Court even more if they were to end the student loan pause. And he also gets to look like more of a moderate, which is probably a positive for him getting reelected, needing to appeal to these key swing voter constituencies. Now, it's true that he also needs young voters to turn out, right? Especially young progressive voters, which is a demographic group that he sometimes struggles with. And so what did Biden get in exchange for giving up the end of the pause on student loan payments? It's actually quite significant. And I think that's pretty stunning that Republicans were, excuse my French, but dumb enough to not, kind of have a firmer line on some of these other issues that they could have probably put a line in the sand on. But it just shows you that they don't really care about student loan debt that much. They sort of care about the headlines, about kind of the big numbers, right? But I actually don't think that the average House Republican really truly understands how much people on the student loan policy side and the progressive wing of the aisle are really running circles around them. And here's what I mean by that. So the White House did secure protecting their new IDR plan. So this is a really big deal, right? If you were going to have the student loan pause end because of a lawsuit from SoFi anyway, and you only spared people, so you're basically only giving up maybe a couple months worth of pause payments before that lawsuit would have resulted in the pause ending anyway, then what is your priority? It's protecting all these sweeping rules on counting deferments and forbearance, or PSLF. It's based off of expanding the types of qualifying employers that can count for PSLF. It's focused on making sure the IDR waiver and the PSLF waiver account adjustments are not messed with. It's focused on making sure that whatever IDR plan that you do is going to be protected from the House Republicans' ability to stop it before you hopefully get it implemented and it becomes so popular, or at least so depended upon by these key swing voters in different parts of the country, that you can't get rid of it even if you had a Republican win in 2024. So that's a major policy accomplishment. I think that the new IDR plan has got a lot better chance of going through now because it survived this debt ceiling deal, and it kind of shows you, I think, the Republicans maybe don't really care about it that much. They might profess to care about it, but more of like in an angry Twitter way versus in more of a, well, I am willing to give up on these other policy goals of mine in exchange for not being able to do this new IDR thing. So that's actually really smart. In terms of if your sole goal is to optimize for the maximum amount of relief given to borrowers, honestly, I think that Biden did a really good job if that's what your goal is. Now, the politics of something I can't really comment on. I'm not an expert in that regard. So I think that if you're just looking at the fact that he protected the new IDR plan, that is just a really, really big deal. Really smart move. The other thing he did, and this is also really smart, is he protected the power of a future president, be it him or somebody else, to pause student loans in the event of an emergency. So let's think about this. What if there is another emergency, and maybe it's a very, generously framed emergency? Maybe it's just another recession, right? And a future president could try to claim that as a national emergency and then go and pause all student loans interest and payments again, the same way they did through the HEROES Act. So that power is preserved, whereas if they allowed the SoFi lawsuit to proceed, what could have happened is that the White House could have just lost not only the pause, but the power to ever pause again. Because if that went in front of a court and the Supreme Court said, this is illegal, the president does not have this power under the HEROES Act, or it said something equivalent to that, or maybe Congress needs to have that emergency declared or something for the president to pause student loans, that would have caused the president to lose a lot of his power, to do something. Now, I guess the other thing I should mention is this debt ceiling deal also preserves President Biden's student loan cancellation program. It does not stop it. It does not strike it down. That tells you a lot, I think, about what folks are expecting on the Supreme Court. Gosh, the House of Representatives leadership and the Republican side must be very, very confident that one of two things is going to occur. Either the Supreme Court is going to strike down student debt cancellation, or if they don't strike it down and it goes through, that kind of what they would call a giveaway would be just so large that people would be happy that the thing happened, right? And kind of think about the way politics works, right? You get something, right? Millions of people get this large benefit, and then, you have politics of resentment, right? So you might see a bunch of ads like, you're working hard to pay down your truck, you're struggling to do an honest day's work, but look, Biden just gave $20,000, a brand new car to all these people because they're more educated than you, right? Those would be probably more effective than political ads saying like, look what we did, getting you this thing, right? People tend to turn out from stuff you've taken away from them or you're trying to keep from them versus stuff you've already given them, I think, in what it seems like in politics, right? So what should you expect as a borrower in terms of when you'll be making payments? So I think we're going to see interest begin sometime around August 31st or so. That's when the actual federal interest will be charged again. And then your first payment, I think, is going to be due somewhere around September 30th. So your first payment won't be debited right when the pause ends. The first payment is typically going to be due about 30 days later. So if you look in your NSLDS file, most people have a September 30th date in their files already. So I think it would be pretty natural just for them to keep that date. So that's kind of what I'm expecting, is they're just going to keep a September 30th date for the payment due dates for everybody. And there's going to be a lot of chaos surrounding this. So a couple things with the servicers. The staffing has gone way down. They have a lot fewer call center people, a lot lower call center hours. You're going to see a massive wave of people calling in like the first few weeks after the pause ends. So if you need to do something like figure out how to log in or update your bank account information or verify what payment plan you're on or figure out when your next recertification date is, like those are all things that I would try to do anywhere between now and probably sometime in August, because they're going to definitely get swamped and you won't be able to get answers probably for a while after the payment pause does end. A couple things to think about. There will probably be a 6-month period of just complete forbearance where you don't have to make payments at all even when the pause ends. We're expecting that to happen. The thing to note, though, is those payments, if you don't make them after the pause ends, those 6 months of sort of the grace period will not count towards forgiveness and PSLF the way that the pause has. So that's something important to consider, is when the pause ends, if your goal is to get forgiveness, you're going to want to keep making payments. The only scenario where you wouldn't is if you have payments on the new repay plan that are calculated to be so much lower than what your current payments are in your current plan, that you're better off using a strategic forbearance for six months so that you can recertify when this new payment plan becomes available later, hopefully this year, but it's starting to look like more likely next year. So what does that mean? The new repay plan, theoretically, if you go by the rules on the books, you've got to get a regulation in place. The final rule has to be in place by November of that calendar year for it to be effective by July of the following calendar year. So if they get the final rule published before November of 2023, then that final rule would be available first for borrowers in July of 2024. And that would be great, like for them, right? For Biden and the administration, because you could show how you're delivering this amazing new repayment plan that's way cheaper and way more affordable right before an election. And if you think about this historically, there's precedent for this. President Obama announced pay-as-you-earn. People forget this. He announced pay-as-you-earn literally at a campaign event in like October of 2012 or something along those lines. Like he was at University of Iowa and he was trying to basically get what Congress passed, which was the new IBR plan that's 20 years still forgiveness, 10% of your income. He was trying to announce that and get those benefits delivered to people earlier than the Affordable Care Act. I think it was in the Affordable Care Act, until that legislation was effective at a later date than the election, right? So he was looking to announce something that would be effective sooner than that. And why did they set this October 2007 date for the cutoff? It's because he was giving a presentation to the class of 2012, and they would have started borrowing for the first time in the fall of 2008. And so he needed whatever new repayment plan that he announced to be accessible to the University of Iowa graduating class that he was speaking to. So that's the history of why pay-as-you-earn exists, because it's the exact same thing as new IBR. They just tried to extend, that plan to get it available early and make it available to that audience that he was addressing. So I think that Biden could try to take that approach and say, well, we're going to have it be available by July of 2024. He could also try to fast track it. And this is something that I think is really possible, because President Obama also fast-tracked the existing revised pay-as-you-earn plan. That was available around December of 2015, I believe. And this was something that, again, probably by the books shouldn't have been available until July of the following year. But they essentially fast-tracked it through some, kind of clever methods to get it available sooner. So I think that it's really up in the air on the new repay plan in terms of when we will see it. I do think that, most people will not need to recertify their loans before the new repay plan becomes available. So if you were on any kind of certification during or before COVID, you probably won't have to recertify your IBR or IDR plan until new repay does become available. So then it's sort of an analysis of, do I let my payments be paused after the pause ends because they're much higher than I'll pay on repay, or do I keep my payments going and get more credit towards forgiveness? I'll say somebody with a modest balance, mostly undergrad debt, might really benefit from doing the 6-month pause because you're probably paying, the standard 10-year plan or something like that. And so you're paying $300 a month on a $30K loan when this new repay bill comes around. Even if you have $100,000 of income each and you have 3 kids and you file taxes separately, you could get a payment of like $90 a month. That's really amazing, right? If you think about it. So a $200,000 income couple with one person that happens to have $30,000 of student loan debt could actually be a candidate for 20-year forgiveness under the new repay plan. So it's really going to be earth-shattering, the change for this. And we're going to be following it, of course, really closely. The other thing I think I want to make you guys aware of is that the House and the Senate is probably going to pass a Congressional Review Act resolution, which is going to basically cancel all the stuff that Biden has done on student loans. So this is probably going to pass by the time this comes out. That bill probably will have passed, and that is something that you shouldn't be afraid of. And the reason is Biden's going to veto it. So the way this happened is it was a party line vote in the House. Republicans pushed it through and basically would eliminate a lot of the IDR waiver type stuff. Now, I'm not exactly sure how much. It would also end the pause. Some consumer advocate groups are saying retroactively, it doesn't matter what it does because it's not going to pass. It's not going to get signed into law, rather, is what I would say. And why did this pass in the first place? Because Democrats control the Senate, right? So 3 key Democratic senators voted to kill Biden's student debt relief plan. Tester of Montana, Manchin of West Virginia, and Sinema in Arizona. Why do they do that? Sinema is kind of viewing, her path as an independent, as the path for reelection for her. Tester is viewing, his path to reelection as being, a very conservative Democrat in a very challenging state to be a Democrat, right? Montana. And then Manchin, of course, Trump won that state by like 30 points. And, there's a really disproportionately low share of people that have college educations in West Virginia compared to the rest of the country. I think it's the lowest share of people with a bachelor's degree in the whole nation. So it kind of makes sense why at least a couple of those senators voted against it. So, but again, one of the reasons they voted against it is because they knew it had no chance of passing, right? That's another thing about Congress is it's kind of weird. You might see people vote for something. You're like, wow, why did they vote for that? Or why didn't they vote for that? And a lot of it just has to do with people vote differently when they know something's going to become a law versus if they know it's not going to become a law. So in this case, this bill is super scary. It looks super scary. You're going to see a headline about how Congress has voted to eliminate all of Biden's loan programs or something like that. And it's going to go to Biden. He's going to veto it. Now they need a 2/3 majority to overturn it. They're not going to be anywhere close to that. So it's not going to go anywhere. So in summary, IDR waiver, safe. PSLF waiver, safe. New IDR plan, safe. Most of the stuff you've been relying on or hoping for, safe. Student loan pause ending, but ending basically at the same time that Biden said it was going to end. So, if this is the worst that student loan borrowers face, that's better than a lot of people expected, I'll say. Obviously, the cancellation would be really, really hard, and especially on a lot of people that were hoping for it, especially at the lower income, spectrum. But, we're going to focus on what we control here in the podcast because, there's a lot we don't have any control over. So I'm excited about helping you in the weeks ahead. It's going to be a chaotic period. I will say that once we get the new IDR plan final regulations, which I'm expecting to happen literally in any week now, the final regulations for the new repay plan were submitted to the Office of Management and Budget. And I would almost guarantee you that they're going to have this regulation ready before the payments restart to have a talking point to give borrowers some hope. So I think that means we're going to see the new repay regulation come out very shortly, even though it won't be available probably until 2024 at some point, if I had to guess. And once we have that, we really know a whole lot in terms of, IDR waiver, which ends at the end of 2023. Don't forget that. The PSLF waiver, those combined programs, we're still seeing people's accounts adjusted for those. The sort of COVID era pause, sort of ending the ability to get possibly refunds on payments that you made during COVID. That's another thing to think about. Making sure you've got correct payment counts on your loan forgiveness. Evaluating, this is a funny statement, evaluating whether or not you should refinance your loans when interest does resume. A lot of people could cut their rate by 1.5%. The question is that worth it with all the stuff you're giving up? It depends on the person. That's a one-on-one conversation we'll be prepared to have for people that want to have that conversation. So it's going to be an interesting and a chaotic time for student loan borrowers. And the good news is I think that like in a lot of things that are gray, I think the good news is the student loans are going to make a smaller impact on your life when they resume than you think. But it is going to be an impact, right? So we're going to be here for you to make sure we minimize that impact. And if you need anything at all, reach out, Travis at studentloanplanner.com. If you have any comments about the show, I would go to studentloanplanner.com/book. If you'd like to get a plan scheduled with our consultants before we hit that super busy season, you can book, a couple months ahead of time. So if you're trying to time a booking, when the new repay rules come out, you could do that. You could go schedule for July or something like that, when I know we'll have them probably. And we've got a bunch of other cool stuff we're working on to help you grow wealth in the future. So that's all I'll say for now. But until next time, have a great rest of your week, and thanks for listening to the Student Loan Planner Podcast.